The Crimson Widow, the dark legend of Elizabeth Bathory. The villagers whispered her name with fear, each syllable a curse that lingered in the frosty night air. Elizabeth Bathory. Her castle loomed atop the hill like a dark sentinel, its spires clawing at the heavens, its shadow swallowing the tiny hamlet below. For years, young women had disappeared without a trace, drawn by the promise of work within the Countess's sprawling estate. None ever returned. The stories were too terrible to repeat in full, but fragments of horror seeped through the walls like the stench of decay. A maiden drenched in crimson, screaming for mercy, torture devices slick with gore, and the Countess herself, a pale vision of unearthly beauty, her lips painted with the blood of her victims. Marta, the blacksmith's daughter, had heard the tales since she was a child. But now, with her family starving and the winter biting harder than ever, she had no choice but to answer the Countess's call for new servants. Her mother wept as she packed a threadbare cloak. Her father looked away, his jaw clenched against his guilt. The journey to Cactus Castle was treacherous, the narrow path flanked by skeletal trees and snarling winds. As Marta approached the gates, the air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural silence. The massive iron doors groaned open, revealing a hooded figure who led her inside without a word. The castle was as cold as death, its corridors vast and labyrinthine. Torchlight flickered on stone walls, casting monstrous shadows. Marta was led to the Countess's chamber, a cavernous room adorned with crimson drapes and an enormous gilded mirror. Elizabeth Bathory sat by the fire, her dark hair cascading like spilled ink over her slender shoulders. Her beauty was chilling, her eyes bottomless wells of malice. "You're perfect," the Countess purred, her voice a silk ribbon wrapping around Marta's throat. "So much life in you, such vitality." "You're perfect," the Countess purred, her voice a silk ribbon wrapping around Marta's throat. "So much life in you, such vitality." Marta curtsied, her knees trembling. She couldn't meet those piercing eyes for long. They seemed to strip her bare, exposing her every secret. Marta curtsied, her knees trembling. She couldn't meet those piercing eyes for long. They seemed to strip her bare, exposing her every secret. Marta curtsied, her knees trembling. She couldn't meet those piercing eyes for long. They seemed to strip her bare, exposing her every secret. Over the next few days, Marta discovered the castle's horrors piecemeal. The faint cries in the night, the bloodstains that no one bothered to clean, and the other servants who refused to meet her gaze. Once, she glimpsed a girl being dragged toward the lower chambers, her mouth gagged, her eyes wild with terror. "Do not ask questions," whispered Lydia, an older maid who had worked there for years. Her face was hollow, her voice a ghost of its former self. "She sees everything, hears everything. Do what she asks, and pray she doesn't take notice of you." But Marta couldn't stay blind forever. One night, driven by a reckless need to understand, she followed the muffled cries to a hidden stairwell behind the library. The stairs spiraled downward into darkness, the air growing colder with every step. At the bottom, she found herself in a vast chamber illuminated by the sickly glow of hundreds of candles. It was a scene from hell. Corpses dangled from chains, their blood pooling in troughs. Implements of torture lined the walls, each glinting blade and spike stained with old gore. And in the center of the room stood a massive iron bathtub, half filled with blood. The Countess was there, her alabaster skin glowing in the candlelight, her fingers tracing the surface of the crimson bath. She turned, catching Marta in her gaze. A slow smile spread across her face. "Ah, my little lamb," Elizabeth cooed. "You shouldn't have come here." Marta turned to flee, but the guards were already there, their hands like iron shackles. They dragged her forward as she screamed, her cries joining the cacophony of the doomed. "You'll serve me well," the Countess said, stepping closer. Her breath was cold against Marta's cheek. "Your youth, your essence, will preserve my beauty for decades to come." The last thing Marta saw was the Countess's face, a mask of exquisite cruelty as the blade descended. The villagers heard the screams that night, but dared not investigate. By morning, the blacksmith's daughter had joined the ranks of the forgotten, her fate sealed within the castle's stone walls. Yet the legend of Elizabeth Bathory endured, growing darker with each retelling. And somewhere in the hills above, the Countess bathed in her crimson elixir, her laughter echoing like a dirge for the damned.